I'm really excited now to introduce my colleague, Genea Foster, who will be moderating today's panel, originally scheduled for the annual GreenThumb GrowTogether conference that was canceled due to COVID-19. Genea is a Brooklyn native whose Afro-Caribbean ancestry has shaped their deep commitment to environmental and social justice. Genea is an urban planner who has worked with youth and communities of color towards environmental justice, climate resiliency, health equity, and food sovereignty through community-based participatory planning, popular education, and community organizing. At Green Thumb, Genea is a project coordinator supporting community garden groups in achieving their collective visions. Thank you so much, Genea. We're really eager for this panel, and you have the mic.
Thank you so much. I have the honor of moderating today's panel, and I'm just sending a big and warm thank you to all of our panelists who are doing incredible work in their communities to enhance resiliency in New York City. Lucia Hernandez has been a community gardener in the Bronx for the past 16 years and a beekeeper for approximately 9 years. Lucia is a retired licensed massage therapist who has a disability, yet remains active in order to be a resource for her community and to improve her mental and physical health. Lucia has volunteered for the Hunts Point Resiliency Project and is a current outreach volunteer for the Be a Buddy program, which prepares the Hunts Point Longwood community for the impacts of climate change through community engagement and health education. Ceci Pineda is a facilitator and earth steward dedicated to climate justice and queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, people of color liberation. Ceci currently serves as the executive director of BK Rot, a food waste bike collection and composting service powered by young people in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Ceci finds hope in community practices that further land regeneration and reciprocally heal our communities. Priya Bulgaonkar is an organizer and urban planner with a passion for climate justice. She currently works as the resiliency planner at the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, where she advocates for a fairer and more climate resilient New York. She is also pursuing a master's in urban planning at Hunter College, studying the intersection between climate adaptation, resilience, and gentrification. And last but not least, Leslie Velasquez manages environmental justice programs under El Puente's Green Light District, a holistic 10-year community development program for the neighborhood of Los Suras, Williamsburg, Brooklyn. In her work, she mobilizes community members and promotes public policy for initiatives related to a wide variety of environmental issues, with open space equity, air quality, and climate justice as major focus areas. Leslie earned a BA in Government and Environmental Studies from Skidmore College. So to kick off our panel today, I first want to hear from all of the panelists. If you could tell me in your own words what climate resilience means and what you envision when you think of climate resilient communities. We can start with Priya.
Great. Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yes.
Thanks so much for having me on this panel. It's so great to be with everybody. So I guess to just give a little context about the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, we're an alliance of 11 grassroots organizations from low-income communities and communities of color throughout New York City that face, disproportionate exposure to pollution and who are on the front lines of the climate crisis. So when we think about community resiliency, we're really thinking about kind of a holistic vision for communities of color to be able to withstand kind of the impacts of climate change, but also the other inequalities that these communities face. We think about, direct climate impacts like extreme heat. We think about storm surge and flooding, but, it's also really critical to address other systemic inequalities from police brutality to access to affordable, healthy housing, affordable and community-controlled renewable energy. So we really try our best to kind of learn from our members who are on the ground and doing this kind of intersectional work when we develop our advocacy campaigns and legislative campaigns to address resiliency. So definitely resilience, community resilience involves community-led solutions and kind of holistic intersectionality.
Lucia?
Hi. I don't know if you can see me.
Yeah, can you share what climate resilience means to you and what you envision when you think of climate resilient communities?
Well, we had Sandy, I believe, in 2012, and that caused a lot of infrastructure damage to the parks that we have here, Barreto, Point Park, and the Hunts Point Riverside Park. And we saw the need to prepare ourselves for any major climate disaster that we had. So we did get some grants to, yeah, I'm working with the Point, and they trained me on some of the about what resiliency is to get back on our feet, to resolve the problems that we had before they could occur or after they had occurred. And so we had to um, um, get monies together uh, uh, to help with the flooding situations that we had in the area, to help with the energy, because we did have a blackout at one time. So how do we work on that? So resiliency also is to educate the community to be able to be ready for those situations, where to go in case of an emergency, evacuation areas, cooling sites for the elderly, um, um, people that have been have to have equipment, medical equipment that you would need the energy in order for them to survive. All these things, we have been training to be able to help the people. And, I joined the Be a Buddy, and that has taught me some of the things. So I speak to the members that have registered with us, and preparing them, teaching them how to have like a go bag, just in case of emergency that had to rush out. At least they will have some money, batteries, a phone, money, different things. And we also helping the communities by having for them to register to get ACs, in case of a heat wave. And at this point, some of them of the people that have registered, the elderly, are receiving the ACs. So that's a good situation that has pushed us towards being more prepared.
Thank you. How about you, Leslie?
Just want to say again, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this panel. I think for me and for Puente, climate resiliency for community is about being well organized and prepared, of course, but also really about being self-sufficient and self-sustaining and regenerative. So, that could look like communities having democratic and shared ownership of and access to local sources of food, energy, housing, the resources, but also really importantly, a local economy that reinvests in itself and the community. So it's circular rather than being extractive. I think that's a problem that we've seen in a lot of low-income communities. And of course, this has to be like holistic, like Priya said. So looking at it at multiple levels, not just environmental, but looking at issues of racial inequity and economic inequity. And then also working with other communities to achieve this so that there's coordination and sharing solutions. And obviously the government needs to be a part of that too, and support communities in doing that. And it really can't be siloed work. So that's kind of, how I think about it.
Thank you. Ceci?
Yes, thanks again for having us be a part of this conversation. So for me, I guess I first want to frame that I understand the climate crisis to be the culmination of unsustainable and unjust worldviews, which have given rise to many of the systemic injustices we now face. So similarly to what Priya and Leslie have said, for me, it means climate resilience means the community's ability to withstand the impacts of climate change, to maintain their well-being, and to have conditions where we can thrive. And so for me, key things that are a part of that involve community determination and also addressing systemic injustices. Like we have to make sure that folks have access to housing if we want them to be able to survive these conditions, or that folks aren't incarcerated and getting the brunt of all of these impacts, or that someone can live in their full gender and won't face discrimination or unjust policies in a response to climate impacts as well.
Thank you. So in that, I'm hearing that climate resilience requires us to look holistically at what communities need to be able to thrive, whether that's housing, health, well-being, conditions of the environment. But also that climate change has this potential to make existing threats within communities worse. So I'm wondering if you could just briefly talk to some of the intersections between climate resilience and the political moment that we're in right now around responding to COVID-19, but also the uprisings against anti-Black racism that we're seeing across the country right now.
Yeah, I guess I can share a little bit. So for me, I think in our response to these crises, we can't just be thinking about just the short term and these solutions that may be like cheaper or more accessible solutions, but don't truly invest in our communities. And we have to be laying the groundwork now for things that, and I think it's like a both and thing. Like when we move towards racial justice, when we move to a world that doesn't perpetuate anti-Blackness, we are moving towards climate justice and climate resilience in the same ways that in thinking about our response to COVID, like even thinking about all of the budget cuts that were made to the city in this perspective of what do we need to keep everyone safe right now. We're cutting so many social services for youth employment programs or things that are really hindering our long-term resilience, or even for on our end, the cut to the New York City's composting project sites have increased placed an incredible demand for the composting of food scraps, instead of being able to have this bigger picture of how when we are able to process the food waste that then turns into compost, you're creating local job opportunities, and then you're also able to restore our soils and increase our community's capacity to even grow fresh food locally. So I think we have to be looking more at these solutions when we're moving forward.
Does anyone else want to chime in?
Well, let me see. You can see the video. One of the things that I experienced because of the COVID was that as a beer buddy, I had to speak to the members that I have registered, and to be able to comfort them, to be able to find out what they needed. And the intersections were that I was able to get different organizations to actually provide box food for some of the members that I had that had the need. And also, if they got sick, I will provide them the areas where they would get the medical help that they needed. So I think the combination of the point helping our place also helped. And it was, I think it was tremendous help that they did for the Be a Buddy members. So I don't know what else to say. But I think that with the combination of everybody working together as a community and helping each other, even regardless of the budget cuts, we have a pantry, we have a food source. We did everything possible to help the community at this moment, and we're still helping the community. So it's an involvement with the community and the organizations, because sometimes you just cannot depend totally on the city. Even some of the buildings, landlords have supplied food for the tenants from the buildings. So that's a great help.
So you all have really diverse sets of experiences. Some of you work directly in gardens, some of you are doing planning work within communities and doing a lot of policy advocacy around climate resilience. Could you speak to some of the ways that you are promoting sustainability and biodiversity and climate resilience in your work?
Sure, I can kick us off if that's okay. So in my role at the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, I primarily work on our climate justice political campaigns. So that involves, legislative and policy advocacy work. And as I mentioned, we're a network of community-based organizations. Actually, shout out to El Puente, which is one of our oldest member organizations. And we really strive to kind of coalesce the priorities of our members into these advocacy campaigns. And climate and community resiliency has been a really critical priority for us as an alliance. In some ways before Sandy, but I think Sandy was kind of the big pivotal moment for us. And I think it's really critical. At the kind of core of what we do is really about addressing systemic inequities and responding to the need for citywide investments in green infrastructure to mitigate stormwater and to mitigate heat, but really targeting those investments in low-income communities of color and environmental justice communities to really kind of maximize the benefits of these investments. In communities that have been disinvested for so long. And as we're kind of developing campaigns around addressing carbon emissions, for example, we are part of the New York Renews coalition that helped pass the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act last year. We really made sure that that legislation explicitly devotes resources to frontline communities so that they can, we can adapt and invest in resiliency measures that, similarly to what Leslie mentioned, that are kind of in community control and kind of allows for the communities that we serve to withstand disaster and climate, climate impacts. And I think, like, to Genea's kind of follow-up question earlier around the intersections with the political moment, I mean, I think that the response, the impacts of COVID on primarily low-income communities of color, and these are the same communities that have been dealing with disproportionate rates of asthma, heart disease, and cancer because of the historical racism of how polluting infrastructure is cited. And these are the same communities being brutalized by the police. And it's just critical to keep those in mind in how we shape our advocacy and solutions, and totally uplift Ceci's points about where are our budget priorities as a city? How are we devoting resources to address, multiple intersecting issues at once?
Speak.
I know that you do a lot of work with native plants and bees, so would love to hear about that, Lucia.
Yes, well, I have a lot of biodiversity in my garden because I have introduced, with the help of the Butterfly Project, all kinds of native plants that are pollinators, bushes and plants that I've got introduced into the garden. And that has brought such an array of different kind of butterflies besides the monarch butterflies. And actually, the butterfly plants have actually helped with the pollinating of the that I have. And I only have 21 beds, but I have been able to get like 400 pounds a season of harvesting that I have waited and everything. And it's actually herbs and vegetables and fruit, because I do have some fruit trees now in the garden. And I have such an array of different kinds of bugs that help. I have garden snakes. I have raccoons that come in. I have falcons. I have, of course, the hawks that fly around, and we even have seagulls. So we have a mixture of this biodiversity that's helping the garden, because the garden is like a forest. It's a very large garden. It's up in the hill, so it creates a different feel than a regular flat garden. I have introduced composting to the garden. I have introduced amending the soil with the compost, so that's good. It changes the whole structure of the soil, and all my beds are nice and clean. So a lot of the vegetables, they just taste very different from what you buy at the store because it's nice and fresh. It doesn't have any chemicals, so it's great. The children that used to come into the garden would say oregano, call it pizza. The lemon balm, the herbs, they would call it, I think it was a lemon or something, or I had basil and they would call it bubble gum. So there's a lot of diversity, things that you could use, that you could work with the kids. I even had two children that I taught them how to be beekeepers, that their parents allowed me to. And I used the kids to involve them in how to plant, how to put seeds, use the seedlings, know about nature, know about watering, know about so many, using companion planting so it could enrich the soil, how to work the earth, and they learn so much, and I think they taken that forward, in so many ways. And also, I have the kids from the Point Action that have come to help me, because we do have a lot of weeds and everything. And I've also introduced, the herbs for healing that I actually use for myself, and to improve my health whenever I can. So there's a lot of things that are going on in the garden. And of course, we have invasive species of Japanese knotweed that we try to reduce. The sticky weed, but it's native to this part. But we work around all that. So it's interesting how I've given a lot of the vegetables out to my neighbors in the block, and also my neighbors in my building. So there's always something. And I'm also a beekeeper, so even with the bees, I have more crops. Before I didn't have hardly any vegetables growing because they were so tiny. So now I have a larger crops which I could give and help people. And the honey is fantastic. It's fresh. It's fantastic. It's healthy for helping with people with allergies and seasonal allergies and everything, and it's local. So I give out my honey to the neighborhood, to my building also, and also to the Point. This is my gift to them when they come and help me in the garden, because it's a very large garden, and it's a lot of work that you have to do in that garden to maintain it and to keep it. So I would get a lot of help from the organizations there. So that's why it's nice to have this community together, because that's a resiliency that you have in the climate change, where all these different groups, Sustainable South Bronx, the Point, the Rocking the Boat that has done tremendous work with the Bronx River water. They do test the waters. They train the kids how to do boats. So so more self-sufficient, and of course, we have pantries near the areas that help the people, and that's fantastic. And some of them are organic vegetables and fruit, besides the ones that I give. So I think
it sounds like Bryant Hill is doing a lot of amazing things, from intergenerational learning opportunities, practicing regenerative agriculture, beekeeping. That's all amazing. I'm wondering if any other panelists want to just chime in quickly before we move on. What is the work that you are doing in your garden or community? I know El Puente has some gardens. Ceci.
I can share real quick. So a lot of Puente's environmental justice work right now is focusing on our air initiative, which is about open space equity, and air quality. So our community has a lot of sources of pollution, and as a result, like high asthma rates. So we created Our Air, which is like a citizen science project involving youth to collect data on air quality. And we're also working with young people and local artists to create art about this project and about environmental issues to inform and mobilize community members. And then working with students and professors at Pratt and the New School, as well as community members, to come up with like policy and urban design solutions. And so a lot of those solutions are focused on improving and expanding our open space, because our community also has like a critical lack of open space that helps improve air quality, as well as providing all these other climate benefits like reducing heat and flood risk. Just improving, general quality of life, can be a food resource and like a sustainability hub in so many ways. And yeah, I guess our work is also evolving with the present moment, and trying to address COVID and understanding the link between air pollution and COVID, especially in low income communities of color. And then also like what other people have touched on with the city budget, directing funds away from police forces and into community solutions, not just, for safety, but also, health, and just being able to respond to this moment.
I can chime in quickly too. Yeah, everything that folks are sharing sounds so powerful. And Lucia, what a beautiful garden too. So at BK Rot, where we model a closed loop system in dealing with organic waste, both commercial and residential. And so we have youth workers who like to collect food waste, and then they do all of the hand turning and that arduous work to transform it into compost, which then goes into our community to heal contaminated soils and also support bringing up vibrant and fresh, nutrient-rich food. And it's also really key to us in this process to center the leadership of the young people of color who do this work. And I also just want to note that BK Rot is located inside of No Wastelands, which is a garden that's filled with like native plants and really a thriving garden that's moved also more into food production, giving COVID. And one part of the garden that I want to highlight too is we've put in one of the corners like a milpa, or it's also known as like a Three Sisters crop. And we've seeded Lenape corn and beans also, and recognizing like that there's a real importance for healing and for ritual for a lot of the trauma that the land has carried and our communities carry to, and native communities to these lands. And so really recognizing the role that we can play in doing that and moving towards a more regenerative society.
What do you all see as opportunities and challenges present within community gardens to enhance community and climate resilience? I'm particularly thinking about this question because a lot of the folks listening are engaged in their gardens and might want to do more work to prepare their communities for climate change and just overall resiliency. So what do you see as opportunities and challenges, and what advice do you have for community gardeners?
Well, I've had my challenges with membership. Sometimes, you could have a few people coming in, and you prefer to have a whole group of the members coming in at one time to do a project. So that sometimes that doesn't happen because of the people have lives, weekends sometimes, although in the weekday, and they have families. So that's been one of my challenges. So what I've done in the past, and I still try to do now, is to involve the children in the neighborhood, and they have to help me tremendously in the garden, and I've taught them things, and they have even learned landscaping with me. So that's a good resource. And then we have, other children, like from the Point, the action group that comes to help, and they have been taught somewhat to a certain extent, but every garden is different. So uh, every member has their own way of gardening. So sometimes you have to teach the kids those your techniques, what you need for the garden, because every garden has different needs, you know. And my resources is the volunteers that I get, besides the members, the volunteers, from and also the help from GreenThumb, the help from the botanical garden, the help from the Point, the help from so many different organizations that have helped me maintain Intervine that's associated with the Sustainable South Bronx, and of course, the, the grants that you could get from citizens citizens committee. So there are good things, there are challenges that I've worked on. Especially one of the biggest challenges I have is the weeds. Rains, the weeds. Rains, weeds come up. You pull them, they come right back. So that's my greatest challenge in the garden.
And I'll chime in quickly to that. I mean, I think even as we heard from Lucia, just talking about the biodiversity and the thriving life there's so many opportunities in making our gardens these models of climate resilient spaces. And I think for me, an opportunity too is like recognizing how so many of these best practices for regenerative agriculture or climate resilient farming actually are things that our ancestors have been practicing for a long time. And so it's how do we bring back these stories into a city context, recognizing a city that has such an incredible range of like diversity, and how do we make spaces and gardens for people to bring through like this knowledge and making our gardens more resilient. And I think gardens can also serve as space for conversations about climate change. I mean, for a lot of gardeners, you can immediately notice like the seasons are changing, a lot of things are shifting, and thinking about how we can use them also as workshops to support folks in thinking about the bigger climate impacts that will happen in New York City. Challenges are definitely just access to land in the city and increasing pressures of gentrification that just breaks up community, or I've seen a lot of community gardens that used to depend on certain people for tasks, and those folks have been displaced. And so thinking also about there's so many of these vacant lots that have been that way for 20 years or more. So how can we support communities in getting access to these lands and using them for vibrant spaces that can create more resilience when it comes to local food and also cooler spaces. There's so much potential there.
I'll just chime in briefly. I just really appreciate the wisdom of like the practitioners on this call. Like I really appreciate hearing from Lucia and Ceci on the actual, many ways that community gardens can serve for resilience. I think that kind of intimate practitioner knowledge, there's sometimes a barrier between that and, the ways that the city government or not like bigger nonprofits think about community gardens. And I think it's really critical and appreciate this space to uplift those voices. I think also in terms of kind of just going off of Ceci's points about gardens being kind of resilience hubs or places of spots of resilience to talk about climate issues. They're also potential places to really invest in ways to mitigate climate impacts. I mean, just naturally, green spaces help cool neighborhoods, and that's really critical, especially for environmental justice communities who are more likely to, face illness or death from extreme heat during the hot months and need places to cool off. But we also have to deal with increasing storms and the intensity and frequency of storms. And I think there is an opportunity to invest in green infrastructure to mitigate stormwater in gardens. And I think to Ceci's point about kind of freeing up land for that use, I mean, the city and the state are already committed to expanding green infrastructure. Maybe it can be done in a way that uses this underutilized space for both purposes, for community space and community food sovereignty and kind of that community hub, and also climate solutions, so we can kind of free up resources for climate resiliency to go to gardens. I think that there needs to be a little bit less like siloed thinking about gardens in that way, and I think there's just so much expertise from folks on this panel and elsewhere. So Yeah, I appreciate the question.
If I could just, oh, sorry.
No, go
Should we
ahead.
move on?
Yeah.
I just wanted to, I totally agree with everything that everyone said, especially about climate benefits and, you know, the pressures of gentrification. But I just wanted to add that gardens are also an amazing resource for environmental education. Especially a lot of kids, you know, living in urban areas don't, you know, have access to like nature, and don't particularly feel connected to it. So gardens are like such a precious resource to be able to like, you know, really foster that connection and love of nature. And I think that can really segue into a passion for environmental justice and getting involved with those issues and activism in general.
Thank you. We're running short on time, so I want to make sure that we have a chance to hear from attendees and answer their questions as well. So I'd like to shift us to question and answer. So people have been sending questions throughout the panel, but want to invite more folks to submit their questions now. So the first question from participants, someone wanted to know how high school students can become involved with each of your organizations, both remotely and once the pandemic subsides.
I can jump in real quick to speak for BK Rot. So we are accepting some remote volunteer opportunities and also offer like workshops if students are interested in learning or things like that. And once we are post-COVID, when we're able to safely host people on site, we definitely do welcome groups. Students can get involved in doing a little bit of the composting work, learning about compost and climate and all of that. So I can respond to that question with an email and our website.
For us, we're still kind of working on the remote volunteer thing, but high school students, all of our after school programming is free. So any student from any high school can come and sign up for our high school programs at our Bushwick or Williamsburg Center.
Lucia, I think you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
Okay, I've had students from different schools to come to the garden throughout the years, and the Boy Scouts have come in, the Girl Scouts have come in, and I do demonstrations and actually hands-on demonstration with the children to teach them how to plant, how to do the seedlings and everything. I've actually had classes on composting with the kids. So, you know, it's great when you involve the community, like the schools, and even high school students from other schools that are not in the area have called me to come in. So, and then you actually get help. They have come in just to help me do some work. So it's been fantastic when you get 30 kids. I mean, it's a lot, but it really helps a lot to get the work done, things that I can't do. And at the same time, I'm teaching them too what to do and what not to.
Another question we have from participants are, someone noticed that a lot of empty shelves at the start of COVID and is asking if you all see community gardeners wanting to grow more produce to help their communities be less dependent on grocery store chains. Oh no, you're muted, Lucia.
Even though the gardens are not open to the public because of the COVID, I'm still going in, and sometimes I find some of my members coming in with me, and we're planting, and we doing the plantings now, and in order for in a few months when the COVID should subside a little bit, at least we could have some fresh vegetables and some fruit for the people at the short end, you know, of everything. So I'm still working there. My members are still coming in and helping me out. So, you know, we done different patches at a time to keep the garden going. but there's still some members that are afraid, you know, of coming in and getting the COVID.
Yeah, I can say anecdotally too that at Green Thumb we've also seen a lot of community garden groups that are interested in playing a role in food production and food distribution right now and showing up for communities. And I think a lot of panelists throughout this panel have also mentioned how that can be plugged into resiliency strategies in the long term. Another question someone has is, do you all have any experience with rainwater capture systems?
El Puente's community garden actually has a huge rain barrel that they use to water the plants because we don't have a water hookup to the garden. So that's been super essential. It's connected to like a neighboring building that's also a community partner. So we got their permission, of course. Yeah, that's been really helpful. And Green Thumb was actually really essential in getting that for us. So thanks, Green Thumb.
Yeah, No Wasteland also has I think it's 4 rainwater barrels that are set up, and we had someone on site who has like a lot of capacity, one of our garden members who set it up that we can attach like a hose to it and an electrical pump so that we can use the hose to water easily.
There's a question here about how do you get support? So I guess this person is in Long Island and hasn't had much support from the local community or authorities in getting a community garden in their neighborhood. Do you all have any tips for sort of community engagement and gathering support for green spaces that you could share?
Uh, get in contact with Green Thumb and see what are the available spaces in their neighborhood that they could start a garden, and maybe they could get someone to lend them their space temporarily so they could have a garden for a temporary time, like a leasing of the space. So I know that the Green Thumb will help them with the supplies that they need, to build the raised beds to get the garden going. So there's organizations that could help. 5/8 that will actually there's organizations that helps you locate the areas where are empty or that could be used for gardening.
Another question is around your experiences with addressing food security in your neighborhoods and if you have any tips and advice around food distribution work.
We've been doing that work, but not with food from our community garden, but in partnership with a food bank.
You can talk about that if you want. Just how do you set it up? And
yeah, so we actually were partners with Los Sures, and so they have their own food pantry that they run like weekly. So that was like kind of really critical for us in like getting the connection there. And then we worked out of NYCHA building, so it's just kind of about having that relationship and then basically bringing that to a different location.
No, the Hunts Point was considered a food desert. However, now we have food pantries in different areas. We have SRAs, I believe that's how you pronounce it, where you could actually buy your own food. So now it's getting better because we have now 2 pantries in the Hunts Point area due to the fact that we weren't getting any support before, but now we're getting the support that we need to help the community.
And one last question I'll ask, we're running short on time, but do folks have any advice around scaling up community gardens and particularly thinking about how to integrate green infrastructure and other sort of design aspects that can help promote community and climate resiliency? I think this is a big one for people because it seems, it can seem very daunting and expensive. And I think folks just want some insight into how to get started.
I think, yeah, I see it as like something that we can do like on a year by year basis, like seeing the garden at No Wastelands, it changes so much every single year. And so just thinking about what is the capacity you have and the availability of folks to commit. I think now it's also a more difficult time to scale up gardens given the need for staggering. But I definitely think like if you can make a plan and meet virtually with your garden, and then thinking about how to make it like maximize the use of your space there.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for participating in this conversation today. Forever inspired by all the work that you all do. And I hope that, yeah, everyone attending this call was able to take away a little something from this conversation today.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks to all the other panelists too.